The United States has made clear that it stands behind Israel's mission to eradicate Hamas, and in an address from the Oval Office, President Biden explicitly linked the causes of Israel and Ukraine as two democracies fending off aggression. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson echoed the point in an article in the Daily Telegraph. Are those two statesmen fearful that the conflict in the Middle East could distract attention from Ukraine? To answer that, I'm joined by Colonel Richard Kemp, formerly of the British Army, who also joins us from Israel. Richard, the fact is that this is distracting attention, the attention of the West, from the Ukrainian war.
It's not only distracting attention, it's also deflecting resources, particularly American resources. As we know, there are two US carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean, and undoubtedly some of the resources that they're using would have been and other US assets would have been directed towards helping Ukraine, particularly in terms of surveillance. But in addition to that, the Americans have been delivering and continue to deliver a significant amount of munitions to Israel, some of which are artillery shells, which Israel may well need either in Gaza or if it has to carry out an offensive into Lebanon, some of which was earmarked for Ukraine. And indeed, large American stockpiles of ammunition earlier on this year were sent to Ukraine from Israel. They've been based in Israel for exactly this eventuality and went to Ukraine. Now, that some of that is coming back to Israel. And in addition to that, I think one other important factor is that, as we know, one of the political elements, particularly on the right in the United States of America, has opposed continued US support to Ukraine. And I imagine, and I've already seen some evidence of it, that some of those people are saying it's essential we support Israel, and this is the reason why we can't support Ukraine, because Israel needs our support more than Ukraine does. And so I think that's having an effect and will have a future effect on US support in Ukraine.
If that is what is being said on the right in United States politics, that they weren't very keen on continuing to support Ukraine either, and that the war with Hamas now means even more so that those people want to support Israel rather than Ukraine, what will be the reaction on the left of American politics? What will be the reaction of President Biden? Will he want to see a peace between Russia and Ukraine, let's say between now and the election?
Well, I think that was always on Biden's agenda. I think from my reading of it, he was always intending to push Ukraine into coming to some kind of accommodation with Russia before the US election. So let's say by the middle of next year. And obviously that's not on Zelensky's agenda. But of course, the Ukraine depends so heavily on US support that if the United States threatened or suggested that they would minimize or even stop any further support for Ukraine, then it might leave Zelensky with no choice other than to come to accommodation with Putin, if, of course, Putin was willing to go along with that as well. And that, I think, would mean, from my understanding, would mean that Russia would hang on to pretty much all the territory it's got now in Ukraine, and Ukraine would have no resources to push back on that, and would effectively be left with a frozen conflict along lines that are probably not totally dissimilar from what we've got now. And of course, I think Putin wants that. I think that's partly Putin's objective. And I think we have to consider the hand of Russia in this war in the Middle East as well. You mentioned the objectives of Hamas and Iran in disrupting Middle East peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel and other objectives. But I think we shouldn't forget the close alliance between Russia and Iran. Iran's been supplying a large amount of drones to kill civilians in Ukraine, supplying them to Russia. Russia, in turn, has been providing Iran with a great deal of money and also sophisticated military resources. Hamas, Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad fighting against Israel have got strong links with Russia as well. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad leaders both met with Putin and his subordinates in Moscow in recent months. So I think we shouldn't ignore that aspect as well.
Richard, I think that's a really useful insight into the global politics of all this. Thank you so much for being on GB News.